Welcome back on stage one in the Investment and Portfolio Management Trend stream for DKF 2021. I have now really the honor to announce the technology panel for today. The panel has a promising title, Pokemon and Market Data Technology Evolution for the Battles Ahead. The panel will be moderated by my dear colleague and TRG Screens COO, Lee Waters. Lee is an experienced business leader and board director with an extensive experience in private equity, growing revenue and managing international teams. The panel has a top-class lineup with Drew Orsinger, Dr. Stefan Wilhelm, Sjord Leemhuis, Geoff Horrell, but they will introduce themselves in the panel. So Lee, gents, it's your stage, and we are proud to have you on this stage and looking forward to a really interesting discussion.
Okay, thank you, Anja. Let me first of all wish you a happy birthday. I think everyone else has done the same. I've gone with a Pokemon theme for that. So happy birthday, Anja. On to the serious business. Welcome again to panel 4. This is the session on Pokemon and market data technology evolution for the battles ahead. As Anja just said, I'm your moderator. I'm Lee Waters, and I'm now going to ask each of the panelists to give a brief introduction to their company and themselves. And we'll start at the top of the list with Drew.
Hey, thank you, Lee. Good afternoon, everyone. Drew Orsinger. I'm the founder and CEO of TradeX. We are a immutable ledger company looking at tracing and tracking data flow of market data to help on the compliance, visibility, and security of that data flow. I'm really excited to talk today about what we're doing with our immutable ledger technology.
Stefan?
Hello, yes, I'm Stefan Wilhelm. I'm the Chief Data Officer of Financial.com. We're a Munich-based service application provider in the financial industry. We are working in a close partnership with Refinitiv for many, many years now. And specifically, me and my team, we are doing a lot of research on data, with a lot of conceptual work, including UX, UI, prototyping, and obviously we are always following the latest technology trends. And I'm also very happy to be here with you today.
Sjord?
Hi everyone, my name is Sjord Leemhuis. I'm the founder and CEO of Owlin. With Owlin, we shape a better informed world. We look at everything that is unstructured data. So we look at 3 million news websites globally, and then we analyze them, we structure them by helping our clients to highlight any risk, opportunities, or trends that are hidden in data. We work together with lots of asset managers globally, also with a couple of the big rating agents and the big 4 consultants in the area of supply chain risk, credit risk, and everything that has to do with structuring text into signals.
And Geoff?
Hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Geoff Horrell. I'm Global Head of Innovation and Labs at the London Stock Exchange Group, formerly of Refinitiv Labs. And the labs team, we are a group of around 30 data scientists, user experience experts, full stack engineers, ecosystem managers, and we work with our clients and the London Stock Exchange Group heads of each business unit to identify what is the emerging trend that is something that is difficult, something that is challenging in terms of developing and evolving our financial markets infrastructure and data business. And we work in a very lean way to develop and publish prototypes and turn them into then successful businesses. And they're very keen to talk to the panel today around the change in data science and the change in machine learning that is really driving a lot of behavior that we see across the financial industry today.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks panel. So let's get into it. So many of you are probably wondering what's Pokemon got to do with technology? Well, you may be surprised to know there are lots of similarities between Pokemon technology. So both need to evolve to succeed and get to the next level. Both Pokemon and technology need to match with each of the challenges that they face. Both require investment in time and training in order to get the most out of them. And both are required to build on some essential building blocks and prerequisites in order to be able to branch off into new areas. Also, both Pokemon and also some of the technology you can see on the right there, in terms of email, the internet, Messenger, Microsoft Office, mobile phones, were all created in the 90s. Whereas I'd say Pokemon have continued to evolve. The franchise continues to grow. I guess the challenge for us is that how many of us today are still reliant on some of those technologies you can see on the right there. Almost 25 years ago, we're still using them today in our workplaces. So that's a good segue for our next section, which is let's look at some evolving technology. So Forbes magazine put together this list of the top 25 emerging tech trends. You'll be glad to know we're not going through all of them, but we have picked out a few highlights. So throughout the panel today, we'll be digging into these. And for each of them, we'll be asking the panel, what are they? Why do they exist in terms of the benefits, the value, what the drivers there? How, in terms of practical applications, what are some of the enablers, what are some of the barriers, building blocks? And then finally, where do we stand right now? Where are we in the adoption cycle? So if that's all clear, I believe I'm going to hand over to Drew, who's going to kick us off with blockchain. So Drew, over to you.
Thank you, Lee. Appreciate it. When you first brought up Pokemon as an idea to talk about how this panel was, I sat back and tried to think about, wow, is Pokemon still a thing? And I was talking to my 14-year-old son about the panel, and who collected a lot of Pokemon cards 6-7 years ago. Went into his stack of Pokemon cards here and pulled out some of his highest valuable cards. This one is over $75 US. It's a Lugia Legend Pokemon card. And so to Lee's earlier point, it's interesting to see how technology evolves, but how some of that core use is that's still valued from a technology cycle perspective is important, and is also serves, I think, as a really good reference for where things go in the future, even though technology continues to adapt. The fact that Pokemon still has a strong structural base, as demonstrated by my 14-year-old, I think is significant. And so along those lines, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about blockchain for a few minutes. Just a quick point of reference and a little bit of background about me. I ran security at CME Group. I was one of the fortunate things from that experience was around two things that helped us form this company today. The first one is around blockchain, and it was interesting to me to see CME Group struggle, as I think is indicative of the entire industry at the time, to understand how blockchain could be used beyond just cryptocurrency, specifically, codes like Ethereum, and how that could be written into different applications to solve other problems. And we continue to still see that struggle today, in my opinion. When you fast forward from 7 years ago and you look at the structural ecosystem of blockchain, you see things like these NFTs that I think everyone has heard about now in the last couple of months, along with some of the continued struggles, especially by tier one firms, to figure out the value proposition of blockchain networks. You still have firms like ASX, the Australian Stock Exchange, still trying to fully flesh out and deliver what I think is a really incredible idea around clearing for their clearinghouse. But it's still it's not easy. And then one of the lessons that I learned many years ago is that how we engineer technology, how we use that technology to solve everyday problems is extremely important. And the other piece that I learned at CME Group was around this data flow, the ecosystem that I wasn't natively involved in, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to this group at DKF here is around market data. And it was interesting to me how old and institutionalized a lot of the technology is on the back end for this data flow to occur. And I subsequently left CME Group to go work at SpaceX, and I had an aha moment when I was there, when I was looking at encryption technology, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about encryption and security later in this program. But it occurred to me that we could use encryption with some very basic ledger technology that I learned about at CME Group to come up with a really interesting way, an innovative way to solve a problem. And that, from a tech perspective, is around this idea of immutability. And I think there's still a lot of confusion and hand-wringing around what blockchain can do. And it is at the core around how blockchain delivers on immutability. And I think there's a misperception that you need consensus and proof of work on a blockchain network to get immutability. And that's actually not the case. And so we're able to, at TradeX, provide an immutability for each transaction record, and through encryption, put that on the ledger. And unlike other things on blockchain, which requires things like an extraction layer, when you look at an immutable ledger, you have the ability to natively understand and see how the platform is performing and what that usage is, which is at the core of what we do. We're also able to not hold the data, right? So that's significant in understanding, especially from a regulatory perspective. If you needed to go in and look at where and how that data was used, not just by the firm that owns the data, but permission access to other pieces of the ledger, that's really, really important. So I think there continues to be, there will be more benefits and value of blockchain going forward. But I think firms are still going to struggle with the complexity of the code, the latency that exists around blockchain. It is not a very easy thing to play with. It's hiring developers to use blockchain to solve problems outside of a decentralized nature like cryptocurrency. I think it's still going to be a struggle. And I think we'll see going forward firms like ours that are really focused in on understanding the value of immutability, and where, as you look at our diagram there, where immutability sits between a traditional database on the far left, which is highly manipulated or has the ability to be highly manipulated, to a full DLT network, which is much more complex and has a lot of overhead, a lot of latency, doesn't have the ability from a volume perspective to keep up, with obviously the high volumes of data flow that exist within our world here. So that being said, I'm happy to talk a little bit more, but I wanted to just kind of give you that thought and overview around where I think the tech has. I think a lot of people have forgotten that blockchain has been around for the last 7 or 8 years, and firms still continue to struggle with how they're going to use it. But we're no doubt going to see, as the cryptocurrency world evolves, and as you see that happening day to day now, especially with Bitcoin being in the headlines, and Ethereum reaching an all new high yesterday, that will continue to evolve in terms of what tokens and crypto does. But I think you'll see the technology also evolve with it, and we're really proud at TradeX with what we do to be able to be an example of how we're innovating by taking a piece of that idea around immutability and applying it at scale and at speed. So that is where I think things will continue to go. And with that, Lee, how is that for an overview?
That's great, thank you. Yeah, I'll open it up to the rest of the panel and see if the other panelists have got some views on how they see the practical applications and where we stand currently with adoption. Who'd like to go next?
I guess I would say, Drew, I mean, we see across our customer base, huge number of projects have moved from the sort of labs area or innovation area into production with DLT technology, and it really being a kind of a sort of second or maybe third wave of things driving it forward. I'm interested in your perspective, where are the areas that you think the investment world needs to be really focused on the application of this technology? What's the kind of sweet spot right now versus I know there's some limitations, right, with the capability that I think the industry will evolve, but I guess where do you think people should be right now, and where should the further out innovation projects be? What areas should they be on?
Yeah, that's a great question, Geoff. From my perspective, the current focus is around where blockchain can be used within specific worlds or applications, right? Whether it be a digitization program, whether it be on clearing or settlement. I think what's interesting and where we're seeing a lot of interest and traction is around how immutability can be used to prove a transaction, which could be really obviously helpful when, in prior discussions here at this conference, given all of the regulatory constructs, the ability to independently prove something occurred immutably is not hard to do, right? And that's where TradeX has really looked at developing a niche. And so I think you can do that without having to bring in a whole team of blockchain developers and to code against that to achieve that outcome. The other one is around looking at and understanding where data usage has gone. So I've watched, in my experience, the whole digital rights management, DRM, as well as other applications. The ability to understand data flow outside a native environment continues to be a challenge, and that's also another area where I think immutability from a technology perspective can help. And then we're doing things like, with Solace, I think is talking later. We have on the infrastructure layer side the ability to trace and track and prioritize using a ledger, message flow, right? So when you're thinking about the volume of messages that Solace does as a message broker, they're in the typically billions of messages per firm per day. Not all of those messages are important. The ones that really are important, though, like order fill, order execution, can immediately can rise to the top and immutably shown that message was delivered. So there's other, I think, ideas and applications for where this can be applied with a much significantly less overhead, less complexity, but still have a lot of that same value prop. And so I think, in my opinion, as I watched, again, going back 7 years ago, CME Group, I think, was really focused on understanding where they could apply this, but it tends to be over-engineered, and I think there's much simpler ways of going forward.
Great, thanks. Sure. Did you want to come in on this one at all?
No, the only challenges I still think, but that's already being solved by taking the best of both worlds, is in general what you see with also the cryptocurrency technology is that it consumes a lot of energy, right? So that makes it also very difficult to scale, or at least makes it extremely expensive to scale. And I believe I read 2 weeks ago that today Bitcoin alone consumes just as much energy as the whole country, the Netherlands, which is gigantic. But I think, companies also like TradeX, they find their smart ways. You try to pick the smart things from the technology, and then see how you can better scale that. Or how would you see it going forward, Drew? Also with energy consumption in a model like you have.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. So 2 points real quick, and I know we want to move on to some other topics, but the idea around, first of all, as you mentioned, our energy, because we don't have consensus or proof of work, the net energy consumption on what we're doing at TradeX to achieve immutability is infinitesimal compared to other networks like full blockchain. But the idea of the kind of complexity, difficulty of blockchain that does create all that energy usage, is interesting. There's a lot of arguments to be made for and against broader blockchain networks and its energy consumption. Especially, I have difficulty with some of the tokens and assets that don't really do anything, or serve much value. There's a lot of pump and dump schemes that are consuming a lot of energy. That being said, I think when you look at Bitcoin in isolation compared to the broader financial networks globally, I think the overall global network energy consumption as a financial industry is massive just on itself. I mean, think about the data center usage, for example, and everything, the co-location services that I used to have to manage. So that will also evolve as technology evolves. But I agree. I mean, I think there are other innovative, easier to go to market ideas that can capture around what blockchain is trying to do that are much leaner and easier to deploy and at much higher speeds.
Great. I think as a nice segue to the next section, I think another aspect of blockchain we haven't touched on much is the security elements. So I believe we're going to hear from Stefan on security on the next slide.
Yeah. Thanks, Drew. And immutability is certainly one big aspect of data security. I want to present an idea of a recent trend or battle, namely the privacy-enhancing technologies. And I'm not sure who the winner of this battle will be, but yeah, let's present this idea. We all know that yeah, due to the pandemic and yeah, work from home, we see much more remote work these days, and yeah, even decentralized works, and then this all has led to some yeah, bigger or greater cloud adoption, and where we see like higher security needs because of that decentralized work, and simply because the attack vector or attack surface is much bigger than it used to be. Yeah, most people think of the cloud as someone else's computer, so there is definitely some need for securities. And like most private persons and companies are concerned with their data privacy. They want not to share their private or sensitive yeah, information. And on the other hand, the same is true for service providers, such as yeah, algo providers with proprietary models. They are looking for model privacy. And here we see a new trend, the trend towards privacy-enhancing technologies that propose a solution to that problem. And there are some or different ways to get to privacy. One idea is the so-called homomorphic encryption, where we see like recent development. And the idea of this homomorphic encryption is simply that it protects your data when the data is being used. And this is a fundamentally new idea. So data is not protected when it's stored or when it is in transit, because this is something where we have well-known solution to that. But the idea is to work on encrypted data. And so homomorphic encryption is a crypto scheme that allows to exactly do that. So instead of just passing my real age and my medical conditions, for example, to some service provider, I encrypt it with my public key, and I'll share the encrypted data with that service provider. The service provider works with my encrypted data, gives me or returns me an encrypted result, and I can decrypt that result with my private key that I own. And the only person that I can see the result is me. So with that simple idea, yeah, the data would be protected at any time. So, and that would give persons their full control over their private data at any time, right? So that's basically the idea behind that. And I see lots of applications to that. So not just for medical applications, as I already mentioned, but also in the financial space, where people usually don't want to share like their financial records, or any other application where, such as automated translation services or so, where I don't want the service provider to know what I'm translating right now. So anywhere I want to hide the input, or I don't want to compromise the data I'm using. And I feel it's a very, very great idea. And we see some companies that are already working in that field. So there's one company called incl in Maryland. And we see that there are many, many libraries out there. For example, in the Python ecosystem, there are some good libraries that sit on top of the already existing machine learning libraries like PyTorch and TensorFlow. These extensions will allow us to do machine learning on encrypted data. And I find this idea very, very fascinating, and definitely we'll need some more applications to that, so that we get wider adoptions to that. And on the other hand, like for barriers, I see one downside of this whole approach, and one is that homomorphic encryption comes with a significant computational overhead obviously, because I can't do the simple operations in the clear text, but I just have to do all operations in the cipher text. But some people say that this overhead is massive, so in a scale of hundreds or thousands. This is not something that we see with the libraries that I just mentioned. But there is some overhead. And on the other hand, I could see a potential conflict or battle with the big tech companies that possibly might not be willing to support this idea that data is encrypted at all times. And maybe not only the big tech companies that might not support this idea, but maybe also governments or so that tend to ask for backdoors in encryption schemes and the like. So from my perspective, it's a great idea, but I see a battle here between like those who aim for privacy versus the top tech companies, governments, and so it makes it hard for us to see where we would be here like 3 years from now.
Thanks, Stefan. Thanks for linking it to the Pokemon battles as well. It makes the theme make more sense. Anyone else from the panel like to jump in on anything around security?
Yeah. Oh, good, sorry.
Yes, I think I fully agree, right? I think it's a great trend. I think what we also see in our world is if you start identifying people and also personal information, you end up with that you need to take into account the GDPR regulations. And I think to what extent do you think this could maybe be an answer to say, okay, listen, we don't have to anonymize, we just encrypt, and that will make us GDPR compliant. But do you think there's a connection there too, or do you think that's a long way to go?
From what I see is that these libraries exist, so they're ready to use as of today. They are certainly in a pre-alpha state, so their development is not yet finished. But I definitely see that this will like comply with the GDPR regulations here, because at that point you cannot just identify the person from the ciphertext. Yeah. So
I think that would also solve a very interesting problem that that also companies like us face when we work with data and when people come in place. You want to be able either to exclude or anonymize. This might be an answer there.
And maybe one more thing to add. I mean, the idea is to work on encrypted data, and doesn't necessarily mean that all data needs to be encrypted. So there are settings where the data is private and the model is not. And there's the other setting where the data is public, but the model is private and proprietary. So there are different settings where this come into play. And I could imagine that even mixed settings exist where some of the data is encrypted, but others that are more public or that are not sensitive will not be encrypted.
I think the other approach to this, which I don't know if you mentioned, Stefan, is around generating synthetic data. And so what I've seen is there's a lot of movement to go, well, for the work I need to do I need access to the real data at all? Can I just create a synthetic set of data that is statistically has the same patterns as underlying data, but is actually entirely different, and is there's no possible way for it to be reversed or engineered in any way, and so it's not encrypted. It's just an entirely different data set. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really interesting piece, because if you have a hypothesis and you want access to the data, why not work with a completely synthetic data set and prove out your project, and then right whether you want to go back to it. And it also, I've talked to a few companies doing this kind of work, and they're finding, they're getting approval from the regulators around that synthetic data much more easily than using other approaches.
I mean, as I said, from my perspective, we're at the very beginning, with this trend. Like, we've seen other trends from this Forbes 25 list that are much more developed than this part of privacy enhancing technologies. Although it dates back to 2009, so it's a 12-year-old thing. But I see us at the very early stage with regards to adoption and usage, or we are not in a situation where this is massively used at this point. But interesting trend, and I guess would be worth to follow up in a couple of years on that.
That's great. Well, I think we started to touch on some of the digital platforms and big data and analytics. I know, Sjord, that's an area you're very familiar with. So, could you give us a few minutes on that area?
Yeah, sure. So I think in order to a couple of things that you see right now, I think back in the days, a lot of big financial institutions were working on making the data available, right, and making sure that you had access to it, that you could work with it. I think what we have seen is there are great index technologies right now, such as Elasticsearch or Solar, that are on the shelf that you can use to index your data sets, and that gives you and also gives access to a whole big group of data scientists to really work with the data as well. And I think what one of the interesting things is there's a big shift, and I know it might also be a bridge to the next topic. So big data is something from all times, right? I think you take a big Excel sheet and you can already say that this is big data. I think what really changed is the numbers, that we can work with the numbers at scale, but also the way that we are analyzing it. So, for instance, take a look at the very first technologies that did machine translation. They were all using statistical models to do machine translation. What you see right now is these statistical models have been replaced by neural models, where also more a machine learning network and a neural network is responsible for making sure that you translate your results. And what happens? It's more efficient. So I think previous machine translation engines, you ran them on the CPU, on the processor, and we also found out it's way cheaper to run those type of processes on your GPU, on your video card, but also the quality became way better. And that is not only for machine translation, that's for a lot of analysis that you'd like to do. I think there has been a lot of developments on open source tools, but also on indices that you can leverage right now to get more results and more insights from your data. And I think we have also one slide more where we're going to talk a bit more about the AI space. Is that correct?
It's already up on my screen. I think if I can ask the moderators to show it as well. It's a great segue into the last one. Yeah, exactly. And I think Geoff was also going to try and lead us on this one. So maybe you and Geoff can do a double act on this one for us.
Yeah, perfect. I know, Geoff. I don't want to take too much away from the AI space, but maybe why don't you take off? I think this is one of the trends I mentioned, and I think you also shared before that you see the change in the work of a data scientist. So maybe nice to talk a bit.
Yeah, absolutely, Sjord. And I think you and I are sort of on the same page around the growth that you've seen in the use of what you just mentioned, natural language processing, and the expansion and adoption of machine learning in lots of different places. And so at LSEG, we did a survey across all of our around 500 data scientists and also executives across the asset management and banking industry. And what we've really seen is that not only is machine learning and data scientists doing machine learning here, but it's really moved from being something that was happening in pockets to something that's actually forming the strategy of the firm. And so that's a shift that we've seen, that people are going, right, if I really want to be a data-driven organization, if I want to serve my customer better, if I want to understand my risk better, if I want to create better trading ideas, that I need to adopt a different way of thinking about using machine learning. And that's probably not just a centralized team of data scientists or an R&D function doing data science. It's scaling that, embedding that with domain experts and with heads of analytics in those different areas. And also assessing, when do I select a tool from the shelf and where do I need to actually really build my own and fine-tune the results to this very, very specific task. And I think that's one of the most difficult things about machine learning, is that it's not generally applicable. It's only very specific to an individual task. And so what you see is more and more data science teams being deployed specifically into the front office teams in investment management and in banking to work on these areas, because it has to be quite tuned to the individual use case. And with that desire, there's a huge demand for talent. And the demand for talent is, people who can understand not just the statistics, and because ultimately machine learning is just maths, but the statistics, but also the business use case, and fundamentally now to scale this work, the engineering. So how do I get this to work in the cloud? How do I make it repeatable? How do I do that work? So you're asking a lot from your poor data scientist. And so in the area of talent, there's a lot of development around specialization of these roles, of making sure you're using the tools from maybe the cloud providers to help you scale things. So that's a big shift. And I think the data scientists, what we see is them being increasingly used as an advisor. What's our strategy? How should we develop this work going forward, and them having to play that advisory role as well. So it's a tough time for data scientists. It's great because it's a very hot market, but it's a very complex and really exciting kind of emerging space. And I guess
can I elaborate a bit on that? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that 100 to you sort of bit, because I think one area we've also seen is we did the survey 2 years ago and said, well, are you working with text, with financial text? And there's a small percentage said yes, that was their sole focus. The last survey, which was just finished in the middle of 2020, that number has leapt up. And it's more like 20% just working on text and over 50% using text and structured data. So the growth of natural language processing has been really huge, and there's been a lot of advances that have made that happen. And so I think that's a really exciting trend that's taking place as well.
Yeah, I fully agree, Geoff. I think I also like your requirements list of what a good data scientist should own as competencies. One of the things that we often encounter is if you talk a bit about should you buy or build, and what we see is it's not that hard to do some tests and run some analysis. If you're a trained data scientist on a sample data set and make sure you get some insights. But it will get way harder if you want to do it at scale and integrate it throughout your organization. And then you definitely get to need all different angles on board as well. You need to think about, okay, you can compose an algorithm that is extremely precise, but that won't scale. So then you might need to redesign it completely. And I think all those lessons learned, I think that's also the same dynamics we have gone through, for instance, with our team for many times. It's what you always see time over time. We see that other companies tend to underestimate how hard it is to really get something that works, that scales, and that you can integrate in your daily workflow. And I fully agree. It's making sure you have the talent on board, you make use of the latest technologies, and also get the benefits of scale work in your advantage.
I think that the develop to machine learning pipelines and machine learning operations and like the kind of industrialization of this approach is a big piece. And I think it's going to come very quickly, I think, to the financial ecosystem, because now with the EU regulations that the draft regulations around governance for AI and machine learning have been published by the EU. And I think that there will be this drive for having governance, all the things that we had on data. Big data is exciting. Next, data governance, chief data officers. We just talked about privacy and security. All of those same things are going to happen to machine learning. Governance, fairness, explainability, and so on. So as an industry, it's really maturing. And I think
a nice comment to bring it back to Pokemon. Everyone knows the game, maybe also the Pokemon Go, right? Where you had to go out walking in the streets with your phone to find the Pokemons. Not everyone knows that actually was also designed in the innovation lab of Google to also get more data points in their machine learning models to know everything about location and location based. So I think it's also the whole landscape we're seeing. Regulators today might have a different opinion about that than they would have yesterday. But that's really, you need a lot of data and you need to connect the dots to get better insights and better models for your business.
That's great. I think we've got about a minute left. So I guess Stefan or Drew, any wise words within 30 seconds you want to add to that?
So I'm absolutely surprised where AI is already present like today, and so there's so many software that come with AI modules at this point. Like Salesforce has the Einstein add-in to make predictions based on AI. So does Tableau, which belongs to the Salesforce ecosystem. We see when our developers are coding, they can, for Visual Studio Code, they can just add in that does code completion based on AI. And so AI is not something in the future. AI is here, and it's everywhere. So it's very surprising.
Drew, last 30 seconds to wrap everything up.
It'll be interesting to see how we see AI evolve with blockchain technology on some level, right? Maybe there's been some interesting conversations I've had with people in Zug around blockchain 2.0, and I think there'll be opportunities where AI can potentially intersect with where those networks are going.
Perfect. Well, I think unfortunately time really did fly by for us. So I guess we just need to thank the audience and the panel. That's my thank you, Pikachu at the end there. It's not really been shown on screen, I think. But I guess we hand back to Anya.
Thanks. Time was really flying with this inspiring discussion, and we would have more time would have been good, but the next speakers are already waiting on the stage. There was one question in the Q&A sessions, so perhaps we can answer them afterwards. But thank you very much. Great discussion and really great to have you on this stage.
Thank you.
Thank you.